Happy Bastille Day, and welcome to my cluttered office. Today, Constance reminded me, of course, it's Bastille Day, which is another holiday that falls in, along with American Independence Day. It falls within the month of Lontober. And because I have a French surname, and because I love all things French and romantic, Bastille Day is always cause for celebration because it represents, at least initially represents, the first outburst of liberation. And the reason I'm showing you the Tower card here is because it commemorates the liberation, if you will, of the Bastille, which we sort of view as a prison tower that supposedly was inhabited by political prisoners of the King of France, foremost of which was the Marquis de Sade, by the way. Anyway, the Bastille doesn't even exist anymore, and the few prisoners that were in it have passed into mostly obscurity. Nevertheless, it's a liberation. It's a symbol of liberation, and that's always good. And of course, revolutions cease to be revolutions after the revolution has happened, and it usually degenerates into something else. Nevertheless, it is a basic impulse to liberate oneself. And that's something that we all share in common. And Constance reminded me this morning, or wanted to suggest that I discuss a little Liber by Crowley, a small essay by Crowley, called Book 3, Liber 3, or Jugorum. And Jugorum means the yoke. And anyway, it's really short, and I'm going to remind you, you got to keep in mind that Crowley was a sort of an extreme guy. Instead of suggesting that somebody pinch themselves, he would suggest slash your arm with a razor blade. Not only that, but he did that. And there we go. Shows little cuts with a razor blade. Okay. Don't do that. Don't do that. Not a knife. Constance uses a rubber band. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Liber Jugorum. And it's in little sections, 1, 2, 3, and things like that. I'm not going to preface every line with its number. Behold the yoke upon the neck of the oxen. Is it not thereby that the field shall be plowed? The yoke is heavy, but joineth together them that are separate. Glory to Nuit and to Hadid and to him that hath given us the symbol of the rosy cross. Glory unto the Lord of the word Abrahadabra, and glory unto him that hath given us the symbol of the Ankh and of the cross within the circle. These are the beasts wherewith thou must plow the field, the unicorn, the horse, and the ox. And these thou shalt yoke in a triple yoke that is governed by one whip. Now these beasts run wildly upon the earth and are not easily obedient to man. Nothing shall be said here of Cerberus, the great beast of hell, that is every one of these and all of these, even as Athanasius, I'll spell it for you, Athanasius, hath foretold us in this matter, the matter of Cerberus. For this matter is not of Tifereth without, but Tifereth within. Part 1. The unicorn. The unicorn is speech. Man, rule thy speech. How else shalt thou master the sun, S-O-N, and answer the magician at the right hand of the gateway of the crown? Kabbalists, picture that in your mind, please, the crown being Kether, etc., etc. Here are the practices. Each may last for 1 week or more. Avoid using some common words such as and, or the, or but. Use a paraphrase. Or avoid using some letter of the alphabet such as T or S or M. Use a paraphrase. Right. Avoid using the pronouns and adjectives of the first person. Use a paraphrase. Of thine own ingenuine, devise others. I'm going to digress. I'm sorry, I'm going to digress. In my practice, I chose to avoid using the word I. Now, whenever Mr. Lon wanted to use the word that I just said, Mr. Lon was given a small scalpel, beautiful stainless steel scalpel, which Mr. Lon thought would be a hygienic and effective thing. Don't do that. Don't do that. Scalpel's bad. Razor would have been better. Or better yet, Mr. Lon could have just used a rubber band or something. It's really hard to, it makes you on guard over everything that comes out of your mouth. And Mr. Lon was not very good at that. And the record of cuts on Mr. Lon's arm were many. And Mr. Lon at the time was called Mr. Lon at work because Mr. Lon worked at a preschool. And Mr. Lon had to explain all the little Band-Aids on Mr. Lon's arm. And all Mr. Lon could say was, Mr. Lon got careless this weekend. But Mr. Lon's getting ahead of himself, And now Mr. Lon's not gonna keep this up. I won't keep it up. Oh, excuse me. On each occasion that thou art betrayed into saying that thou art sworn to avoid, cut thyself sharply on the wrist or forearm with a razor, even as thou shouldst beat a disobedient dog. Feareth not the unicorn the claws and tooth of the lion? Thine arm, then, serveth thee both for a warning and for a record. Thou shalt write down thy daily progress in these practices until thou art perfectly vigilant at all times over the least word that slippeth from thy tongue. Thus bind thyself, and thou shalt be free forever. I'm digressing again here. In our early hippie days, when Constance and I dropped out and moved to the wilds of southern Oregon and sort of lived in a funky, loose, communal kind of situation, we would have days of fasting and days of silence. And we did all this. It was before I knew about Crowley or any of these practices. It was just normal monastic disciplines that we put ourselves on, and strict vegetarian diet and things like that. And like Wednesday was going to be my day of silence, and I was pretty good at it. And it's really helpful because it makes you constantly vigilant about how unimportant 99.99% of what comes out of your mouth is unnecessary. And it was pretty good. But whenever you slip up, it's really interesting to see the crap that comes out of your mouth when you forget your discipline. It's usually not a profound pronouncement of any kind. As a matter of fact, I've never found it to be anything worth saying that I broke my silence for. We were driving down Waldo Road near Tequilma in Oregon, and I saw an abandoned building kind of thing, about the size of a large, like 2 or 3 phone booths, British phone booths put together. And it was ramshackle. Somebody had built it somewhere and then just dumped it by the side of the road. And I was doing really good with my day of silence. And then I just blurted out, "Hey, that would make a great outhouse." The master has spoken. Part 2. The horse. Okay. The horse is action. So the first one was speech. The horse is action. Man, rule thine action. How else shalt thou master the Father and answer the fool? At the left-hand gateway of the crown. Fool, left-hand gateway. Now it looks like the right hand when you're facing a tree of life, but it's the left hand on you. Okay, but I digress. The horse is action. Man, rule thine action. How else shalt thou master the Father and answer the fool at the left-hand gateway of the crown? Here are the practices. Each may last for a week or more. Avoid lifting the left arm above the waist. Avoid crossing the legs. Of thine own ingenuum, devise others. On each occasion that thou art betrayed into doing that thou art sworn to avoid, cut thyself sharply upon the wrist or forearm with a razor, even as thou shouldst beat an disobedient dog. Isn't that incorrect? I don't think Crowley ever beat a dog, okay? This is macho Crowley talk. Feareth not the horse, the claws and tooth of the camel. Thine arm shall then serve thee both for a warning and for a record. Thou shalt write down thy daily progress in these practices until thou art perfectly vigilant at all times over the least action that slippeth from thy fingers. Bind thyself, and thou shalt be free forever. Or shalt be forever free. Excuse me. Okay. His footnote says this practice should not be dodged. One, by failing to cut at the first moment of discovery and giving oneself, so to say, I'll make 10 cuts when I've made 10 slips. No. Or two, I'll make a slip in view of the immediate need. I don't mind the pain of the cut. No. The object of the whole exercise is to create a sentinel to stand watch at the threshold of the mind. With this in view, one should be able to study the psychology of the practice in detail and arrange matters so as to obtain the best results possible. Okay. Part 3. The ox is thought. So there's speech, action, thought. Man, rule thy thought. How else shalt thou master the Holy Spirit and answer the high priestess in the middle gateway of the crown? Gimel. Okay. Here are the practices. Each may last for 1 week or more. Avoid thinking of a definite subject and all things connected with it, and let that subject be one which commonly occupies much of thy thought. Being frequently stimulated by sense perceptions or the conversation of others. You'll find that once you start doing this practice, you avoid talking with people. You huddle take refuge in your own hermitage. By some device, such as the changing of thy ring from one finger to another, create in thyself 2 personalities. The thoughts of one being within entirely different limits from that of the other, the common ground being the necessities of life. And that footnote there says, for instance, let A be a man of strong passion, skilled in the Holy Kabbalah, vegetarian, and a king reactionary politician. B, let B be a bloodless and aesthetic thinker, occupied with business and family cares, an eater of meat, and a keen progressive politician. Let no thought proper to A arise when the ring is on the B finger, and vice versa. That's a rough one. Of thine own ingenuum, devise others. On each occasion that thou art betrayed into thinking that thou art sworn to avoid, cut thyself sharply upon the wrist or forearm with a razor, even as thou shouldst beat an disobedient dog. I always want to say, feareth not the ox, the goad of the plowman. Thine arm shall serve thee both as a warning and for a record. Thou shalt write down thy daily progress in these practices until thou art perfectly vigilant at all times over the least thought that arises in the brain. Thus bind thyself, and thou shalt be forever free. P.S. An excellent practice is to control the means of expression, thus challenge the world to make you smile, like Sir Edward when I saw at Coney Island on his first day in 1990. That was added by AC in his own copy of the Equinox. And of course, I don't know what the heck that really is referring to. Anyway, the lecture or the essay finishes off with this, just to make sure that you'll never want to actually do this practice. Actually, Constance used a rubber band, and she could keep the rubber band on her wrist like a bracelet, a little colored rubber band like you get at the grocery store for plastic bags and things. And whenever she did what she was vowed not to do, she'd lift the rubber band pretty high and snap her skin. It really hurts, number one. It leaves a welt or a red mark that lasts for several hours. And at the end of the day, when you're reviewing how many breaks you had that day, your arm does serve as a record, but it's an impermanent record. Nevertheless, the same Pavlovian response is created by snapping a rubber band, because your body really doesn't want to receive that blow over and over and over again. But anyway, that's our Bastille Day little lecture on self-abuse as a spiritual practice. Until tomorrow, enjoy the rest of your Bastille Day. Have a croissant. Have an eclair. Eat something rich. Make love in the afternoon. And then go home. Until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. A biento.